Welcome to the Wheats on Your Mind podcast. My name is Aaron Harries. Wheats on Your Mind is brought to you by the Kansas Wheat Commission and Kansas Association of Wheat Growers. On this episode of the podcast, we are visiting with Andre Rosa, a wheat breeder from Brazil. A brand from the GDM group, Biotrigo Genetics, is a leader in wheat breeding. It focuses on developing cultivars for all wheat growing regions of Brazil and other South American countries. The company was founded by Andre Rosa in 2008. Andre has traveled from Passo Fundo in Rio Grande do Sul in southern Brazil to Kansas, and we are glad to have an opportunity to visit with him on the Wheats on Your Mind podcast. Andre, welcome. There's a reason you're in Manhattan. You have a little bit of a background and connection with Manhattan. Tell us about that.
Well, it's a really pleasure to be here. I have lived in Manhattan for 3.5 years, from 1999 to 2002. And by that time, I did my PhD with Alan Fritz, a breeder at the time, and Gina Brown-Gadira at Throckmorton Hall Crop Science. It was a nice time I had here. Americans treated me really well. I feel at home in Manhattan. Every time I come, it's a pleasure. I have some people that live here that are still my friends. I do have a goddaughter that lives in Manhattan, so every time I come, I got to see her too. And a few friends that I have here, most of them in wheat community. But it's really a pleasure to come here. This is a place with a lot of knowledge in wheat. Every time I come, it's a real pleasure.
Well, you are an entrepreneur, and you founded the company Biotrigo, as I mentioned, in 2008. Did you know you were going to do that before you went to K-State, or you were educated here at K-State and went home and started a wheat breeding company? How did that all come about?
Well, it came about, I was already part of a breeding company that my dad and my brother had funded. The idea was to come here and go back, and that's what I did to improve on that company. That company started in 1989. So I went back in 2002. For a few years, I kept working on that company. And then we had to, for some reasons, to start a new one. So I used what I already had learned and developed into the new company, which was Biotrigo. And all the experience that I had before helped me really, me and my brother, the company belonged to both of us, to have Biotrigo have a fast grow. And but the time I spent here and the training was really important to get that going and get to be what Biotrigo is today.
Let's talk about the wheat industry in Brazil. For folks who are listening who might not be familiar with it, I guess we should start with geography. You're from Passo Fundo in Rio Grande do Sul, which is in the southern part of Brazil. Explain to us where wheat production happens in Brazil.
Well, in Brazil is a big country like the U.S. It's almost the same. Well, Brazil is bigger than the U.S. Continental. With the Alaska, you get bigger, so you have an idea. The wheat is almost all grown on the south, which is really close to Argentina and Uruguay, which probably people would relate more to wheat than Brazil. So that's where 90% of the growth of the wheat is grown there. It's a spring wheat. It's like the varieties are similar somehow like North Dakota or so. The rest of it is in Cerrado, which is a place where we could grow if price of wheat ever get higher, or if we improve genetics and stuff, we could grow more wheat there. Nothing that will make the Kansas get scared or anything like that. But just maybe that we will import less wheat because Brazil is a big importer. It's strange. We import quite a bit of wheat. We consume 10 million tons or 12 million tons. We produce from 5 or 7. I think one year we got to 9, but that was an odd year. We export wheat too because the wheat is too concentrated in the south. And we don't have the railroads or a good method to send it to north. So sometimes it's better to export to Egypt or other country and get from US, Canada, or Argentina, or somewhere else wheat in the north with good quality. It's kind of weird, but that's how we are set. Most of the wheat in Brazil goes to making bread. So US wheat gets in there and makes good quality. It's a country where we often buy some.
Yeah, I had the benefit of visiting you in Rio Grande do Sul this past February, and I was fascinated that there isn't a rail infrastructure in Brazil to move commodities around. But in that part of Brazil, you're growing spring wheat, and talk about the climate. Why is it you grow spring wheat? There is a little bit of a winter time, but it's not much.
Yes, we do have a few frosts there, not very hard frosts, and a few winters like last year. I don't think we got any. That's kind of why we got more diseases. Sometimes we complain for the cold, but the cold really makes, let's say, it's like passing alcohol into everything. It really cleans a lot of stuff, and you get a much better crop after you get some cold going through. If we had more cold, wheat would be better. So we are in a place where it's quite a bit of rain and cold. It's challenging to grow wheat there. That's why one of the reasons why the K-State, Alan, for the breeder, wants to collaborate with us, because of that we have wheats with a lot of diseases, and we have the opportunity to grow wheats, and we have to grow wheats that are resistant to that. And that is, of course, good for those that wants a source of resistance. Our wheats are submitted to a lot of scab, especially. Mm-hmm. Instead of having a few greenhouses or a nursery like usually you have here, we have 50 acres or 60 acres of wheat submitted to a lot of scab. So into that sea of wheat, with that sea of disease, you find some oases or a few populations or wheats. They are rare and, of course, valuable if you want resistance. So that's just one example of the use of being in a place like that. But it's a challenge to produce wheat there.
Yeah, with that wet of a climate, I know parts of Brazil get 80 inches of rain every year. So a farmer growing wheat, just for example, how many fungicide applications might they make on just the wheat crop?
Yeah, that's a good question. When I started career, we would do half. And then we discovered that wheat fungicides were starting getting better, and we started releasing varieties that would yield better if well protected. As a company, we tried to protect the farmer, since knowing we had fungicides, to things that the fungicide will not protect, like sprouting, sometimes scab, because the fungicides are not effective. But even with that, the farmers apply usually 3 times. Some will apply 5 times, but probably none will apply less than 2.
Okay. So what does a crop rotation look like if you have wheat in your rotation?
A usual crop rotation would be soybean, wheat, and then the next winter they would have oats and soybean every summer. Mm-hmm. And so the winter would rotate in wheat, oats. Some farmers would put just fallow, which we do not recommend, but sometimes people do it. And would be very good farmers include corn into that. But since they have problems with drought and stuff, you gotta be resilient and be confident that that is really good for your system, and people that do it consistently, I see the results. But it's not so easy to convince a farmer, because they have to, soybean makes more money, and then you have to put corn instead of soybean for the good of your system in the long run. But that's the farmers I see in the long run will do better.
So everything obviously is reversed here. You're in the southern hemisphere, so spring wheat, when is that planting window?
Spring wheat you plant, let's say Passo Fundo, where we are, not too complicated. That will be from June to November. And in Cerrado, they plant in February and harvest in July. So we start planting in February and go planting till July, and then we start harvesting in July and go harvesting until December.
As you mentioned, it's a very big country.
It's a big country, and different regions, different altitudes, different latitudes, and so gets to be busy the whole year about wheat.
Yeah, is altitude an advantage for you the further south you go?
And altitude is advantage there anywhere you go. In the Cerrado, you have to plant where there is altitude so that the temperature allows wheat to grow. At least we don't have wheats that can grow efficiently in lower altitudes. In the south is not as important, but usually helps. In Cerrado, it's definitely a mark. You don't try to plant anything where there is no altitude.
So let's talk about quality goes for a little bit. Here in Kansas, we have hard red winter wheat predominantly, going for 12% protein, test weights in the 60 pounds. How does that compare to what you're producing in southern Brazil?
Pretty similar in terms of objective. I think we just have more variability into that. Sometimes we go 12 is usually easy for us. But in some years where yields are really good, like the one I told you that was 9 million tons, that year we had trouble to get to the 12. But usually it's 13, 14. Our environment is not that productive. But as we are improving genetics and crop management and stuff, protein is starting to become more of an issue. So as a company, as a breeding program, as agronomists, everybody's starting to look at nitrogen management and all that so that you can have the best varieties and still reach the amount of protein that is needed. For us also is very important DON, that toxin that scab produces, so we are paying attention to that. Actually, I started worrying about that when I was in Kansas here. I saw that happening in US, what happened in North Dakota, and durum wheat's getting out of it, and said, well, if in here that they have less scab made all that, and I'm in a hot spot, so I better get prepared because it's coming.
Right.
So we started breeding long before this really became an issue, Don. We were 4 years working on that, tried to avoid and help it quite a bit. They haven't solved it with genetics. I don't think we ever will, but has helped it quite a bit, the development we made.
Mm-hmm. There is a lot of Argentine wheat that comes into Brazil, and you're part of a Mercosur trade agreement, so you're required, or Brazil is required to purchase a lot of wheat from Argentina. So what's the role of that wheat when it comes to Brazil? Well,
I don't know if Brazil is required to buy, but it does, because if I remember, it has a 10%. If a mill buy from Argentina,
tariff, yeah,
pays 10% less than if a tariff were compared to US, so it's an advantage.
Advantage, sure.
And that's I believe that is, I don't think there is a minimum, but they certainly buy because it's cheaper.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying it's fair, but that's how things are.
Right.
Argentina, usually they buy from there, but if you ask the mills, they don't like.
Mm-hmm.
They don't like the experience. Usually they complain that they buy A and they receive B. And okay, they complain and if you don't want, you take it back. But they don't, I never heard that they like it. Actually, I heard they like a lot Canada.
Mm-hmm.
And the way the Canadians behave and stuff. US, I haven't heard much, but there is definitely room for improvement. If they mention they like Canada, there is something good the Canadians are doing. Definitely they don't like the Argentinians. They buy because it's cheaper. In general, quality is good. In general, since it all gets really mixed when they get from Argentina, it's kind of uniform, even though they don't select varieties.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a lot of room for improvement, and if the Americans want to compete there, I think there is room that you guys can. Definitely Kansas produce good quality. I don't know, price-wise, it's probably where you are losing today because Argentina is closer, and there is that difference that we mentioned before.
So it's always more affordable to grow wheat closer to home, and I know your stated goal with your breeding program is to really kind of maybe expand wheat production in the Cerrado area. Is that correct?
Yeah, that is correct. In fact, growing in Cerrado, we would be growing really where consumption is, mm-hmm. and a lot of imports goes to that area. So it makes sense. The price of wheat is higher there because it's far from Argentina. It is far from the ports and stuff. So I think that it makes all sense to try to produce it there if we can. And then on their area, differently from the south, the problems are totally different. It is really dry during grain filling and stuff, so diseases are less important, except blast, which is another disease that you don't have here, but we do here. And the wheat quality is really good. Your protein is really good because yields are not high because of lack of water. So the really good quality wheat is produced in Cerrado. There are a lot of challenges. It's probably going to grow slowly in an organic manner because the problems there, genetics, we already kind of solved. So the problem is there, for who do I do? If I produce wheat, to whom do I sell?
Right.
Well, okay, 200 miles away is the mill. That doesn't help much for a farmer, right? No. Or some things like that. Sometimes the mills, they cannot do a farmer harvest and they'll have the mill, well, I will buy it, but not now. In 6 months from now, I will buy from you.
Right.
Where do you put wheat? So those kind of logistical problems, I think now are more important. Sometimes the farmer doesn't have a drill to send it, so they do it, they spray the wheat on like this, and I cannot show the farmer. How do you say?
So yeah, basically.
I don't know the right word in English to say. You just spread it. Broadcast wheat instead of drilling lines. So that's not the most efficient way either. So I think little by little, farmers are buying machines, mills are getting closer, and then maybe 10 years from now, Cerrado will be able to provide more wheat to that region. Maybe we probably will become less of an importer, hopefully be able to export some.
What are the challenges? Is there a lot of on-farm storage? Is it tough to keep wheat in condition when you're storing in that kind of environment?
The problem is that it's not hard as long as you buy the correct bins to do it. Bins to do it. Sometimes today farmers, but that takes a long time, takes financing the farmer for a long period. Sometimes that money is not there. Or when it's there, farmer, instead of doing that, they prefer to put irrigation or other things that will probably give a faster return, which is okay. They gotta choose whether is the best investment. Irrigation, I guess, is probably one they have been using. So I want to talk about those beans that are made of plastic.
Bags
that you just keep filling them. That's something I think it's growing. They use a lot of in Argentina. I was just there last week, and I heard this year they're going to use a lot of it. I don't remember why. They're full of, I think the crop is going to be good. They won't have where to put it, and they want to put on that. And I think that's an option, not a long-term, but a short-term option that may allow the Cerrado to grow more wheat and farmers to, but it's dry. That should work, but not everybody's use it. You require a few machines, the industry be selling the plastic there. That's when I say it's not something for next year, but it's coming. And as long as it is a good, the crop, the resistance is there, and they can have a crop every year and see there is room, it's going to be growing consistently.
Well, speaking of consumption of wheat, there was some good news recently in your state. There was an announcement of a new ethanol plant that I think for the most part is going to use wheat as a feedstock. Is that correct? Yeah,
that is correct. They're going to use wheat as a feedstock, and they'll produce ethanol, and they'll get gluten too out of it. So it's a double plant. We like very much that project. We are part of it. We are producing the varieties that will feed this plant. We have 2 varieties licensed to them already, and we hope that will work and help to improve the area of wheat. I heard, I'm not sure I'm right, but I heard that it is there, and it's not in Kansas, because there we have a shortage of corn already.
Okay.
There is a lot of corn in Brazil in the north.
Right.
But there is shortage even for chicken and stuff. So since we have that, there is no reason to bring corn from outside to do alcohol there. And so especially on that stage, there are the conditions of logistics and price that allow a wheat plant to operate, which probably wouldn't happen in Kansas or North Dakota or so.
Yeah. So the two varieties contracted or licensed to this ethanol plant, do farmers grow that on a contract basis? The mill pays them to grow those varieties?
That's the idea, that they will pay to grow. Those varieties they yield a little more or have a little more resistance. Usually they don't have, of course, they don't have the quality of the other ones that are out. And once we lower the standard and push for lower protein, you can get more yield. And that's probably an advantage of growing. If the farmer can get the same price of one of those and one of normal, that will have a little edge in favor of the farmer. But they will have to be careful when we're growing that, because those varieties don't have good quality to go into a normal beans to make bread.
Sure.
We made sure in the beginning that they are not that bad, that they will hurt in small amounts. But in the future, as long as we progress the breeding for ethanol, that might happen. But then we'll see how efficient is the system to keep that separated. If we can really put a variety out that is really good for ethanol and bad for bread. But if we start seeing things mixed, we'll have to hold on. But anyway, every project is start like that. You gotta go slowly and see how that goes.
Yeah, a challenge but rewarding opportunity. I want to change topics real quick. There's been a big occurrence in the wheat world the past couple of years, and there is GMO wheat in the world now, and it's in your hemisphere, your continent. GMO wheat introduced in Argentina. Tell us what you know of that and your opinion of that as you see it right now.
Well, as I see it right now, Argentinians pushed quite a bit for it. They are growing in acres, like 70,000 acres or so. I heard the last number I just got a few weeks is that they had a number like this, and this year they're going to have a little less, which means for me that, well, it's not a silver bullet or something like that, because it went up and starting to go down. I don't know exactly the reasons. It's supposed to be good for drought, and I think it does improve for drought, but I'm not sure it improves enough. We haven't seen a good consistent data to convince me that is really worth doing. But if we do not have, and so far I haven't seen anything on the markets that say they are not going to buy Argentinian wheat or they're going to pay less, I'm glad to see that is happening, because it might open the US to do it and other countries to do it. Actually, there is no reason why transgenic should be big, the problem that people see. I've studied K-State genetics profoundly. I see how that is controlled. It's much more controlled than other things that we do in life, and we take the risks and don't even, maybe it's safer than the water we're drinking today. So I believe that hopefully that will open the doors for other traits, that other people that have traits. K-State, since 2000 I was here, there was transgenic wheat, but couldn't go out because of reasons we all know. So I believe that will be something I'm cheering for it, that doesn't matter if it takes much of the market, but if it's there and there's nothing against it, hopefully it will allow. And I think we should start allowing here at K-State and other places, because that is a test that is out there. So far is doing fine. And if it does fine, why should we not have a transgenic wheat in Kansas? It's a discussion that you better start thinking of having in some other podcasts and from now on.
It's a discussion ongoing, that's for sure, and I imagine we will cover it. The wheat breeding world is a relatively small community. You mentioned you still work closely with Alan Fritz here in Manhattan, an exchange of information and genetics, which I think will probably find some useful material in your program for disease resistance. Compare for farmers listening what it looks like to be a wheat breeder in Brazil versus here in Kansas. You know, Alan is going to have his job of creating new varieties, but also going out to field days and talking to farmers. What's the day in a life like for a wheat breeder in Brazil?
Well, I think it's different in a number of ways. First, in our case, we are a private company, and we had 160 employees. So at some point I was the breeder, just like Alan. At some point I was the breeder. I was the commercial guy that was out in the field, and I was the guy paying the bills and everything. When the company had 6 people, as we grown, I started becoming a little far from the breeding. And at the point before we left, we had breeders like Eduardo is with us today here, breeding young people, developing wheat. So my role was starting to become different. At K-State, I think Alan is much, in terms of science, is much ahead. He knows much more science and deeply the wheat. Somehow, as we compare, we have more resources to do more locations and have more people spread around because we are private, and that's completely different. I think that's pretty much the main differences. I don't know if you say one is better or the other is better, just different models. As in the beginning, we were just much closer to how is K-State breeding program, and with this, we saw that we needed much more commercial guys kind of going out in the field and being closer to the farmer, and the breeder can do it. You need to have other people that go out and I think the breeder should go there sometimes in a few days, but there should be people that do more of that to be closer to the farmer, just like Rome. I don't know who does that role here, but I'm sure there is people, so that the breeder can concentrate more on doing what he does best, which is developing stuff, and other people will do best selling and passing that information along. I think it's probably how you have it here, but I've been doing all these jobs and I love it to do them all. Well, that's pretty much my thought. I'm not sure what's clear.
It's perfectly clear. I think most of our group, when we traveled to Brazil in February, was so impressed by the size and scope of Brazilian agriculture. Do you appreciate how big Brazil is in the global picture in agriculture, and how do you see that? I mean, do you think Brazil can be the largest player in agriculture on the world market? Are you competitive with China and Russia, like we have that perspective here in the United States?
That's a good question. I probably underestimate what Brazil can do. I think we have a lot of natural resources, and we are trying to use them well. When we got, as a young agronomist, I was very worried when I was young on erosion. Once we got no-till going, I got higher hopes. I still now see some problems. I think that need to improve, because if we keep losing soil, we won't be important in the future. We need to hold that, and everybody does. And I think Brazil had good natural resources. We got respect of companies that bring technology to us and are there, like GDM developing genetics, and Bayer bringing products, and BASF and Syngenta, many others. John Deere went to Brazil. We got same machinery almost that the US has. And all that helps to be in the future. What I really think we are behind and we need to is improve on its science. I still think, like private companies like GDM and stuff are always trying to be ahead, but I see US has much more science to it. In the long run, that makes a difference. I think you should keep pushing in funding, just like Wheat Commission does. My congratulations that you have the vision to do that. Not only projects in Brazil, we tend to have funding only for things that are short-lived, that you can see the result coming right there. And you gotta have projects that are long-term. I see that difference here. You guys tend to fund things like this, and I think that gives you an edge that will keep for a long time in your agriculture in good shape. And I feel afraid that ours usually don't do that. that's the difference I see. But I have to run around. Maybe now that I almost retired, I'll run around and see more. I was in Russia and US, and next time you ask me, I probably give an answer looking in the whole picture better than today.
Well, we'll plan on talking down the road. Thanks for your perspective, Andre, and congratulations on all your success. Appreciate you joining us.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure to be here again, and thanks for all the farmers that helped fund my studies when I was here. Of course, I worked to deserve that during the time I was here too. I know, I'm aware of that, but was even though I had to work, it was a great opportunity. It was important in my career. And I hope during all this time in collaboration with K-State, we have been able to contribute much more than I received. I was able to give it back to Kansas farmers.
I'm sure you have, and we were glad to have you here in Kansas. My thanks to Andre Rosa with Biotrigo from Rio Grande do Sul in southern Brazil for joining us on this episode of the Wheats on Your Mind podcast. Remember, if you have a topic you'd like us to cover in the future or have a question for one of our guests, please email us at kswheat@kswheat.com. Thanks for listening.